A very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is about trust. I love the concept of trust, and even more so because there are so many funny things we say in our daily life. How many times have somebody said to you, "Can I trust you?" And then they look at you like this, and you go like, "Well, why are you asking?" Because if you have doubts, then you probably shouldn't trust me. So we're going to talk about the concept of trust today, and we're also going to talk about what you can do to earn more trust. And I'm just going to switch over and share my PowerPoint with you. Here we go. So I've stated that trust is the key to success. And I really mean that, because if we don't have trust in our organization, if we don't have trust in our team, then we're not going to be working as well together as we could. Because if we have mistrust, we're going to then be barricading ourselves behind and protecting ourselves from what could potentially come. Whereas if we have trust, then we can let go and we can have an open sharing relationship. And it doesn't matter here if we're talking in a team relationship, in a corporate relationship, or even your private relationship at home. Trust is the same thing. So let's have a little definition about what trust is. And it is a belief that someone or something is reliable. So it doesn't have to be a person. We can also trust that when we walk into an elevator, that it is reliable and will get us all the way up or all the way down, and preferably in the tempo that was agreed with the supplier of the elevator. It is also a belief that it's good and it's honest and effective. So we have to believe in these things in order to have trust. What I find most important, and this is what we're going to be spending a little bit of time on today, is that for me it is the end result. It's what you have done and what you're doing. And here I see a lot of people, and particularly managers, and I call them managers because in my definition, there is a difference between a manager and a leader. A leader does trust his people and the people trust the leader. But a manager who expects that just because there is a title on the shoulder, suddenly I am so important, so now you have to trust me because of my title. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. It's actually more difficult the higher you are, because people might be more skeptic to your intentions, or if you're too distant, can they really trust you? So it is an end result. It is based on your history, both your past and your present. And as I said here at the end here, it is earned. So I see a lot of concept called building trust, but it's not about building trust. It's about earning. It's about making you earn that trust, making you deserve it, so that it is a natural thing based on what you're doing. Another thing what we're going to come back to as well is how fragile it is, because once you break it, it can take forever, if at all possible, to rebuild the trust. Now, of course, it will depend a little bit about how skeptic people are. Some people forgive easier. Some people have a hard time unforgiving. But once it's broken, and it's very hard to get it back in its original shape. There's a lot of wonderful quotes on the internet talking about that you can compare it to a glass or a vase. You can break it and then you can glue it, but it's never going to be the same vase or the same glass. So just remember this, it takes time to earn it, and you can lose it in a fraction of a second, which again is why the consistency in behaviors is so important, and that people know they can trust you. And by that, they can then start opening up. So let's dive into it. I'm going to take you into the concept that we're teaching in our classes. We're not, of course, going to be able to do the exercises. We also have movies we run with this concept. But I'm just going to take you through the steps and talk a little bit about what it means, so that you can have a better idea where you can do more. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you a little simple question. If you think about the people you're working with, now some of you are independent business owners, so this may be your clients or your suppliers. It could also, if you're in a company, be the people that you have in your own team, or you can look at your boss, etc. So if you think about the people you're working with, to what degree do you trust them? That's an interesting question, right? Because do you fully trust them? Or are you in a situation where you do not fully trust them because I'm not really sure if I can do that? Then the other question is, in general, what do you think people in your organization, how much do they trust leadership? How much do they trust management? Now, already here, there might be a difference from how much you trust the people and how much people in general trust the leadership and the management in the company. But here comes the interesting question then. How much do you believe that the people around you trust you? Well, what I've seen in trainings, and this is quite it's quite interesting, that many times those numbers are not aligned. So people very often, and this is particular managers in the trainings, in the leadership trainings, they believe that people trust them, although that they don't trust leadership in general, and although they don't trust their people. Now, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Trust is a mutual thing, but as a leader, as a manager, you have to earn it first. Then people will trust you. So let's have a look at what you can do. Let's go through some of the simple steps. We run a 5-step model where we have these steps: be reliable, be honest, be open, keep confidence, and show integrity. Now, these are all just buzzwords. So let's have a little look at each one of those 5 steps and talk about what it means and what you can be doing, what's expected from you. Now, reliability is that you walk your talk. Now, walking your talk is something we say very often, but what does it mean? It means that whatever you say you will do, you do. It means that you're congruent. And this is where I see a lot of people expecting their people to do differently than what they are doing. In other terms, you do something and then you go, you shouldn't do what I do, you should do what I say. Even parents can probably recognize this. They talk about to their kids that they shouldn't smoke or drink at the same time while they're sitting with a glass of wine and a cigarette. That is not congruent. So congruence is vital. This is where people look at you and say, well, if I can't trust you, I mean, you're saying this to me, you're asking this from me, and look at what you're doing. So this is definitely a trust breaker. Unless you walk your talk, you are congruent. And this is such an important part. Another part is that when you give people a promise, and this can happen very often, let's take the example of a promotion. Keep your promise. Whatever you promise people, a promise is a promise, and the word means I promise you, meaning it has to happen. Now, of course, sometimes it cannot happen, and in which case you have to be honest about it, and then you have to make up some kind of compensation. Now, let's presuppose that you promised some of your employees a promotion coming right now. Now, as you know, right now we have many companies in very deep crisis situations, and hopefully very shortly, but it has already started, meaning that companies are laying off people. It's meaning that we are not necessarily doing the growth and the development we had planned for this spring. So maybe you cannot provide this opportunity, at least right now. So the question is, what can you do instead? Well, first of all, I mean, pretty much all should know the situation, but it is still your job. If you're the leader, it is your job to explain how come I cannot keep my promise. And then what can I do instead for you while we're waiting for the opportunity to open again? So this is your job, because that creates reliability. If you keep promising things like raises, promotions, exciting projects, new customers, and these things doesn't happen, people will not consider you reliable, and then you will never get trust. So reliability is really a foundation for building trust and for earning it the way you should. The second is about being honest. This is really something that should be so simple. I mean, it says, tell the truth. Well, unfortunately, very often the truth can hurt. If we're giving feedback, if we're telling people, let's go back to the promotion example, why they're not getting the promotion that they were hoping for, And then you start making up stories instead of saying, listen, I've been evaluating your performance and it hasn't been to the expectations. Now, you could always argue that if you had been a good leader, you would have kept people on the track, but that's a completely different story. Unfortunately, we see many people giving the reasons way too late instead of being upfront, helping people get to where they want. Because to me, that is what a leader is. A leader is somebody who takes care of the people and gets them to new places. And that is your responsibility, and that is your job, and thus the title. However, be truthful. It doesn't help telling lies. Even if they're just little white lies, they can kick back to you because the truth is dominating in the end. And people will find out one way or another. So stick to the truth is a really important aspect as well. Another thing that is important in honesty is that you talk about facts. So many people base their talking from assumptions. Now, if you think about it, we talked about assumptions last Friday and how the brain creates them, and it's something that we can't avoid. However, we can prepare so that we speak more data-based. So assuming means we take something in and we do not really analyze it, we do not dig for more data, and then we start making it the truth. You gotta speak the facts so that it is not assumptions, so it's not just common sense or whatever, but real facts, facts that the other person can understand and agree to. And you also have to share your emotions about them. So if people have not the data about what they haven't delivered, and then also supply them with the content of your heart, meaning you convey the feelings, the emotions that was attached to the disappointment. Now, you don't have to overdo it, but it is important to say, I was disappointed. Because if you were disappointed, it doesn't really help anybody saying, hey, you did really great, but unfortunately, we can't promote you right now. Because that's not making sense. On the other hand, if you say, we had this agreement about what to be done, what to be delivered, you didn't. That really disappointed me, so that's why we're postponing this next step. That would make a completely different conversation, and the person would have an honest chance of navigating in this terrain. Openness is also important. It's about giving information. I still see, and this is what is puzzling me, because I still see people in 2020 holding on to information because information is power. Now that to me is a very weak leader. It's not going to make you great or grand in any way. Your job is to share information, and it shouldn't just be when you're asked for it. You should give information. Right now, we're seeing, with the crisis going on, we're seeing different political ways of sharing the information, and some are better than others. I happen to be living in Denmark, and we have a prime minister here who's really good at making sure that we get as much information as quickly as we can. Now, of course, a lot of things are unknown, so you can't give everything, but she's not just sitting waiting for it, she's also sharing some of it up front. We can always go back, and I'm sure you can find people who can criticize for what should have been done on top of that. But generally speaking, keeping press meetings every day, informing the audience, the public, that is important. And so should it be for you as a leader. You should say, listen, I have something I want to share, and you should share as much as you can. Now, of course, there are things you cannot share, but we'll get back to that. It also has to be reliable information. So do not make up stories just because it's easy. Make sure that it's trustworthy information, data-backed information, that information that people can trust that it's coming from you, so it has to be true. And then it's also about creating this two-way system, because information shouldn't just come from you. It should also come from the employees. So if you feel that there is more to it, so people are saying something, but you feel, oh, there should be more, then instead of just walking around thinking about it or thinking, why didn't they share the rest of the story, you should start asking questions. Now, not in any harsh way, but just say, it sounds like there's more. Would you mind sharing that with me? And then listen. We talked about listening. So listening is really shutting up on the inside. It is not about what you already have on the inside. It is about what they have on the inside that they didn't share in the beginning. And again, we cannot always, due to the way our brain is structured, we cannot always share all the information we actually want. And it's not because we don't want to, it's simply just because we do not necessarily think about what's necessary for the other person. So we share what we think is necessary. And you can also here encourage your people to do the same thing. If you're providing information and they feel there is more, then encourage them to ask. Hey boss, it sounds like there's a little bit more to this story than you're sharing. Is that something you can share with us? Now, sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Of course, there are things that has to be kept confidential. I'm going to come back to that. But again, just teach them to ask and ask yourself. This will generate this two-way open communication that is so important in any modern company. If we have a good two-way communication, we can find out more things faster, and through that, we can navigate better. It doesn't really help you to understand that there's a cliff under the water if your ship has already hit the cliff. So you got to navigate ahead of time. Then, of course, we have the concept of confidentiality. Now, I don't know about you, but I've heard so often people come and say, hey, can I share a secret with you? And I'm sorry, but if you're sharing a secret with me, you're not really keeping it secret, are you? So you have to think about this when people come to you and offer this kind of exciting information. Should you actually receive it, or should you challenge them? Should you say to them, how come you can share something with me that's secret? Now, of course, if you're the leader and you're trying to get brownie points by sharing something with an employee that you shouldn't be sharing, you have to look yourself in the mirror and saying, do I really deserve this title, this job, if I cannot keep secret what, for instance, has been discussed in the leadership room? See, this is again where you think you can gain something, and maybe short term you can, but long term people will know consciously or unconsciously that they can't trust you because you're going to share anyway. You need to have an environment where you can trust that people do not pass on the information that is confidential. Just like we have now in the EU, we have this GDPR law. This is really about keeping information confidential. And we have seen that some companies, particularly some of the bigger public social media companies, had a hard time doing that. And that's, of course, why the law was invented, to keep them from sharing confidential information. Because we can't trust them. Then what can we do? That brings us into that when you walk out of that leadership meeting and there has been discussed something that has an impact, and you know people are waiting for the information, but you were also told, please do not share this right now. Then you shouldn't be the first thing you do, go to your team and say, I shouldn't be sharing this, but if you can keep a secret. Well, how do you expect them to keep a secret when you can't? Again, it goes back to walking your talk. So it's much better being open about it that you cannot. Simply say, yes, there is more, but right now we cannot share that. And then give them a clue about when. And again, if you have doubts about that, ask in the meeting, or ask what can we say instead. This is about being prepared, because if you're caught with your pants down, then you might say too much. And the moment it's out, it's out. You can't put it back in. It doesn't work that way. So you got to make sure that you keep confidences confidential. And this is really, really important, because this is another way of showing you can trust me. Just think about it. If you have an employee with a problem, and that employee comes to you and asking in confidentiality about this, this could be a personal issue. Maybe they have a problem with their spouse at home, or their teenage son or daughter, or financial, and they may be asking you for help or advice. Now, if you start sharing that with other people, you're not keeping it confidential, and you could potentially hurt that person. And of course, if it's something discussed in the boardroom, you could hurt the whole company. So make sure that you keep confidences. The last step of these 5 steps is about integrity. And integrity really sums up the other 4 as well. But you got to display loyalty. Loyalty is about being loyal to the organization, whatever that means, whatever that organization is. If you are talking behind people's back, if you're bad-mouthing the organization you're part of, people will also start distrusting you. You could say that you're getting allies by doing that, because if they are also not happy. But on the other hand, if you are congruent and you are the leader, you are supposed to back the company who is paying your salary. So this is another important aspect, that you think about your loyalty. Where is it? And do not try to gain cheap points by bad-mouthing the people above you, because it's not going to give you anything except for a very short-term thing, and then again, lack of trust. Then, of course, it's about being competent and demonstrating a strong moral ethic. Now, being competent means that you do what you're supposed to do, and you do it well. So if you think about it, if you're the leader, where is your competence? Well, it should be in leadership. It doesn't necessarily have to be in all the technical terms, although in many positions it still is, but it is about you being competent at being a leader. Then people will trust you. They can even trust you, although you don't know so much technically as they do, as long as they know and can see that you are a really strong leader. And then, of course, having a strong moral ethics. Being open about what is your own standpoint. Where are you on your ethics? What are your norms, your values, your personal norms and values? They don't have to be necessarily agreeing with everything, but the fact that you are a morally person, that you are somebody with values and strong values, and you make it clear and you are congruent, you walk your talk accordingly, that's going to give people trust in you. Again, they don't necessarily have to agree. Having strong principles, having strong values, sometimes leads people to be judgmental. We see that, we know that from the studies of the intrinsic motives. So just be careful that it's about demonstrating them, but it's not about using them to judge other people. It's just to show that this is your backbone. This is you, and they have theirs, and you can mutually respect each other, although you're different. Then it's about when you're making decisions, but before we talked about sharing information, whether it was facts or assumption, but when you're deciding, make sure that you investigate enough so that you don't decide on assumptions. So many misunderstandings, so many conflicts come from assumptions. And it's so easy to make them because the brain is programmed to do them. Your job is to find the facts and make sure that your decision is fact-based. Now, again, I'm going to refer a little bit to the intrinsic motives. We know that with the autonomy motive, people who are having a strong need for autonomy tend to be more fact-based, whereas we have people who have a strong need for teamwork and belonging, they will be doing more intuitively. However, just because you use intuition doesn't mean you have to use assumption, because you can still check that you're right in your intuition by asking questions. Again, be careful not taking this for granted that you can't do that just because intuition. Intuition comes from experience. It doesn't come from birth. It doesn't come from anything else but experience. That is why we can make a quick calculation of the situation, understanding the dynamics going on, and then our intuition will kick in based on the experience of what that meant before. However, please check. The more you can do factual, even when you use intuition, the better decision making you make and the less mistakes. It's also about when you're dealing with your staff, it's about being objective. Objectiveness, we tend to be, for better or worse, quite subjective in many ways, and it can be difficult stepping out. But you gotta be fair. If you're the leader and you are treating some people in the team better, you're giving some people more opportunity, that is not fairness and it's not being objective. Having these so-called friends or fans isn't really gonna help you. And this, unfortunately, we see that some people are just shoveling in their brownie points and then they get treated better. They get better opportunities, which may not necessarily meaning that the best person get the promotion, because the best person may actually be the one challenging you. And some leaders still, to this day, 2020, is afraid of being challenged because, ooh, what does that mean? Well, it means you have somebody with a little bit of guts and who actually has critical standards and can ask the what if question. So just make sure you don't judge people, be objective, and treat everybody equal. Treating equal doesn't mean you give everybody exactly the same. It means you give them the same opportunities, although the opportunities may be different. There's always a complex one, but I'm sure you know what I mean. And then going back to the opposite of walk your talk, do not display double standards. You know, one rule for you and one rule for me. It doesn't work that way. Going back to the example with the smoking and drinking parent telling their kids not to do it because it's bad for them. Well, you should know because you're the one doing it, you're the role model, you're showing them what to do. So if you don't want them to do it, then you have to stop and say, I quit. It's so easy. It's 2 words. I quit. And then you quit, and then you can hold them to it. But as long as you keep doing it, do not expect them. And this is, again, I've heard so many times people talking about, oh, I was really rough when I was a teenager, and oh, we did this and that and that. And then they look at the kids and, by the way, you have to be home at 9 and no drinking. Well, the idea of being home at 9 and no drink is probably good. But again, if you're at the same time sitting bragging about what a monster you were as a teenager or as a young man or woman, it really is double standards, and we are not really helped by that. So make sure you're congruent. That is really an important advice. Finally, and again, I cannot repeat this enough, trust is very, very fragile. I've seen so many people in my classes believing that just because they had a manager title, people would trust them. It doesn't work that way. It is earned through your consistent behaviors. And it comes slowly in small doses. And if you break it, it's gone, and sometimes forever. So hold on to the right behaviors and start also showing that you trust your people, and slowly allow them to trust you in the speed and tempo that your behaviors allow them to do it. That is the best advice I can give. So we're going to finish now the presentation here and the recording. Thank you for joining in today, and then we're going to open up for questions and answers.